Welcome to Rooted with Rachel. My name is Rachel Boucher, and this is where you'll find fresh joy for your journey. How often do you come to a holiday like Easter, and it seems to be over before you even get a chance to enjoy it? Well, one way that I've learned to be more present is to spend time during the season before Easter, which is called Lent. So we've been in Lent for almost 40 days. It goes all the way up to Easter Sunday. But whether you've chosen to participate in Lent or not, I want to share with you something you can do right now. A simple way to bring focus before Easter Sunday is to take this week, which is called Holy Week, and it starts with Palm Sunday and goes through Holy Monday, which is today, Holy Tuesday, Spy Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. And it's to take this whole week and really meditate on Jesus's journey toward the cross. Now, I don't know if you've ever observed Holy Week like this, but it's simply a time to focus in on Jesus's last few days on this earth before he was crucified. It's one of my favorite times of year in the church calendar. Holy Week, like I said, begins on Palm Sunday, which was yesterday, and goes all the way through to Easter Sunday or Resurrection Sunday. And thinking on these things really forces us to meditate on him and on the cross all week, making Easter all the more sweeter. So how are you going to focus your heart and your mind this week on Jesus as we move toward Easter? Well, I'm going to share with you something very simple that you can do. And in the past, I've used devotionals or walked through a gospel or focused in on a passage that talked about Jesus's last days on this earth before he was crucified. But one that I keep coming back to is Psalm 22. And Psalm 22 is a passage I think I could never get to the end of. I mean, there's so much there. And even though I've studied it before, there is so much more to gain from meditating on this passage. Jesus quoted quite a bit from this psalm while on the cross. So we know it is central to this time in Jesus's life. So today, in the next 4 days, we will be digging into this psalm. There will be 5 podcasts, this one included, walking through Psalm 22. And I encourage you to write out this psalm as we go. This practice can be very helpful. We'll only take a couple of verses at a time, but it's so rich with meaning. And it's a psalm of David. It's also a psalm of lament, which is fitting for these last days as we follow Jesus on his walk towards Calvary. So this psalm begins with the words, we hear Jesus speak from the cross in a moment of abandonment. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't know about you, but I've been there. I've asked all the whys. I've had things happen in my life and had things happen in our family's life that caused me to ask those big why questions, like, God, what in the world are you doing? Why is this happening? I can't even process this. You've probably been there too. Maybe you're there right now. David continues his questioning in the psalm by stating the extent of his abandonment. So listen what he says here. Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry out to you by day, and you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. He is constantly calling out to God, but he's finding no rest. Jesus spoke these very words from the cross as he was experiencing the full weight of the wrath of God and the abandonment by his Father for us. But then you know what happens? Something very interesting happens next in this psalm. David takes a bit of a turn, and it's interesting because of what he says next. He says, yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Now, I think it's interesting that right after he finishes crying out in the face of abandonment, seeking answers but not receiving any response, he chooses this attribute of God to arrest his wayward wise. Don't you find that interesting? You would think he might focus on an attribute like the fact that God would never leave him or forsake him, or God's love, but instead he focuses on God's holiness. Yet you are holy. This is huge, especially as we look at the cross and what it means for us today. I know it's not the first attribute we might choose, but it begs our meditation. Think on his holiness today. Wrestle with the fact that his holiness is what required Jesus to be forsaken for us. Then David turns his attention to remembering. Listen what he says next. He says, "Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame." So he is remembering here. He's turning his attention. He's going way back to remember God's rescue of his people in the Exodus. And we do the same thing. As we walk through these last few days toward the cross, we remember. We remember the road that Jesus walked. We remember how God rescued us, how we had nothing to bring him but our own sin, and he chose abandonment in order to die in our place so that instead of us experiencing abandonment, we would enjoy acceptance. The focus on God's holiness here is intentional. That is one attribute of God we can focus on this week, his holiness. Sit with the forsaken psalmist as he meditates on God's holiness in the midst of his crying out. Why would he choose to focus on this attribute of God here? I mean, ask yourself that question and really wrestle with it. God placed the wrath that was reserved for us on Jesus at the cross. He was abandoned so that we could be accepted. Today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pray raw prayers, just like the psalmist, to ask the wise, to wrestle with your feelings of forsakenness, and to sit with his holiness. This is where it begins. A holy God must punish sin, and he did in his son's sacrifice on the cross for us. His ways are holy and just, and his plan is beyond our understanding. Trust him. Trust his holiness. Trust in his sacrifice. Trust in his rescue. When the wise are looming large, trust him. If you don't already have something that you're reading this week or something that you're walking through this week, I would encourage you to join me as I read through Psalm 22. Listen in to the podcast or follow along on YouTube, but just follow along and write the scripture out. Today was just 5 verses. Sit down and really write these verses and sit with the words here. There's just something about writing down scripture that helps not only plant it deep in our hearts, but we see things that we might not have seen if we just read it. The words just seem to jump off the page. There's a different level of comprehension when we write scripture. So join along this week as we journey toward the cross through Psalm 22.